Hi, good morning, everyone. Please, if you meet me in the breaks afterwards, just call me Imran. It's a lot easier. So my name is Imran. I am partner at EY, and I lead our FinTech practice globally. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the work that I've been doing as the implementation trustee for open banking. So I've been asked to say a few words on that. And I think I've got 25 minutes. We've got a countdown, have we, here? Thank you. And what I'd like to do is just kind of chunk this up according to the following, a few words on open banking. First of all, I'd like to just talk a little bit about what is it. I was very interested to see that we've got a wide variety of people from all over the world, and open banking is going to mean more to some than to others. So I'm going to talk about what I believe we mean when we're talking about open banking. I'm going to talk very specifically about what open banking looks like in the UK. Not because the UK is the be-all and end-all of all these things, but in the UK we're doing a lot of stuff early, it's quite progressive, and I think it sets a really interesting trend for the rest of Europe and the world. And then I'd also like to end with a CTA, call to action, because I need your help to make this work. So, if we can work our way through that, let's talk about what open banking is technically. So what actually is open banking? Well, at one level, what open banking is a consumer's ability to access their own data, which is currently held by the banks, and to initiate payments. Not necessarily through the banks, but through third parties. So if I just walk you through some of these circles here, what we've got is it's a secure way for customers to actually take control of their financial data, to access it and share it with third parties in a digital manner. Secondly, it allows customers to actually execute payments directly from their bank account, but without having to access their bank in order to do that. So they can give permission to third parties to initiate payments. There's a whole level of detail that exists underneath that, but that's the fundamental concept. The third point is that it's being done, at least in the UK, through a set of standards. They're API standards, and those standards have been developed with as much a view onto the third-party community, to the fintechs, to the alternative lenders, to other non-bank entities, so that they can access this functionality with their customers' consent. And the final piece, and the most important piece, is that everything we're doing around open banking is built with the customer at the very center. So the customer, first of all, needs to provide a consent for any of this activity to happen. Secondly, it needs to be done in a secure way and in a way that they can turn off if it's not working for them. So there's a lot of detail to unpack in there, and I don't propose to do that right now. But what I would like to say is that it's quite hard to talk about what open banking could do, because open banking actually goes way beyond this kind of like spec diagram, if you like. For me, open banking is a little bit like in the very early days when people were talking about the internet, and they were struggling to identify what the killer apps were going to be. They were struggling to figure out how to get people to use it. And don't forget, in the very early days, we had academics that were requested to use it, required to use it, as a condition of the funding, the bursaries that they were getting. And they were told to use it because it was all going to be about email, and it was all going to be about FTP, file transfer protocol. In reality, look at what the internet has done now. Open banking has the potential to also open a lot of creativity, innovation around financial services that we've not seen so far. But I think for me, the interesting thing about open banking is that it really is an idea whose time has come, right? Because we have been thinking about this for a long time, but it actually feels now is particularly pertinent, particularly relevant to do that. And why is that? Well, I think there's a fundamental recognition, certainly in Europe, very much in the UK, that the data that the bank holds on the consumer belongs to the consumer and not to the bank. And if the consumer wants to use that data to access other products, other innovative third parties, they should be able to do that. But that might be an interesting concept, fundamentally, if the question is why would that actually happen now? So what is it that means that open banking is going to happen now? Because people have been talking about this for a while. Well, actually, there's a political scientist called John Kingdon, and he spent a lot of time thinking about when governments and industry actually work together and when things actually happen, because a lot of good ideas never get implemented, and I think this is one that will get implemented. The reason why, his framework, was that actually when you put together a problem stream, you put together a solution stream, and you put together a political stream, that's when things happen. And I think for open banking, those three elements are coming together. So the problem stream is very much that we've got consumers who want to be able to access different products, different services. Why else do we see so much activity in the fintech space? In terms of solutions, we have got technology that's been very well developed and showcased in other industries. It's APIs, it's standard APIs, and those can be used to underpin this in a safe and secure way. But the political element is the really interesting one. In Europe, we've got PSD2, which goes live on the 13th of January, the first element, and we've got GDPR, which is around data protection. These two elements, when you put them together, actually create open banking. PSD2 is the payments leg, and GDPR is the data leg. So we have got regulation. GDPR goes live in May. So you put these two elements together, and you have got open banking. But it isn't just in Europe or the UK where this is happening. I actually see it in my global role as inevitable across many different countries. And it's all coming about in a slightly different way. So in Europe, we've got mandated open banking because of the regulation. In the UK, we've got standardized open banking because the government has opted to build API standards around this. In Australia, we've got data-led open banking. In America, we've got voluntary or commercial versions of open banking, where individual banks are beginning to free up APIs and charging for it. Over in China, we've got a version of open banking, which I call walled garden open banking, that allows consumers to digitally connect all of their financial services with everything, all the other parts of their lives. And in India, we've got state-backed open banking based on the phenomenal biometric identity initiative that they've rolled out over 1 billion plus people. So we're seeing it emerge in lots of different ways. But let's talk a little bit more about what it could deliver. So what has open banking got the potential to do? And open banking, there are many commentators, very viewpoints. I don't claim to have a monopoly on this at all. But let me just work our way through some possible ways that open banking could materialize and start more with the ones that are a little bit closer to home. So it really can give people real control over their finances in a secure way to enable them to move, manage, and make more of their money. I'm going to really whistle through this, but we know in the UK alone that there are somewhere between 6 to 10 million people who are on the wrong financial services product. They're paying too much for a product that doesn't work for them. Open banking should allow them to change products and find the right ones for them in a much more seamless, convenient, and digital way. I'll go beyond that. We also know that there's 2 million, maybe as many as 5 million people in this country already who are financially excluded or underbanked in some shape or form. Open banking has the ability to change that. So think about it. Many of the people in this audience are involved in lending directly to many of these kinds of customers. Wouldn't it be helpful in your underwriting process, in your onboarding process, in your affordability assessments, if you could actually see their transaction data? Open banking will deliver that to you if you can make a good enough case to the consumer that it is a good thing to do. Let's talk a little bit more about the kind of things that a vision for open banking might begin to build on. So it could also actually digitize financial services. And this comment upsets many people. It upsets many people because they already look at financial services and say it's fully digitized already. And you are right, in one respect it is. But when I actually look at the quality of digitization, the transformation that it's had in other industries, such as the supply chain industry or the travel industry, and I realize that actually it's the connectedness of digitization in these other industries that has been really powerful. I don't really see that yet in financial services. But I think that that is going to be something that open banking can help promote. And if we think about it, what does it mean to fully digitize onboarding? Open banking can support that. What does it mean to digitize collateral? These are interesting concepts. The third point that open banking is very much intended to deliver, and this goes back to the political remit of open banking, is further competition. And it's not just competition between incumbent banks and fintechs. It's also competition between incumbent banks and smaller incumbent banks, between digital challenger banks and fintechs. And it's also competition between other parts of the ecosystem that we may not have really thought as being interested in the financial services space. Everything from merchants, who maybe want to accept payments in different ways and actually not have to bear the full cost of interchange, all the way to credit reference agencies, to telecoms providers, and many others, including financial services companies who really want to get into the consumer lending space. But I think the final point, and really here we are extending what open banking could do, in terms of time horizon and also appetite, is also think a little bit about whether or not open banking is actually going to unlock the concept of platform-based financial services. So what do we mean by that? We mean a move away from the historic version of financial services, which is very linear, vertical supply chains, where large financial institutions push product down pipes directly to the end user, where scale is important, to a world actually where we create platforms and marketplaces where consumers and producers can actually come together and buy and sell and interact with each other and buy and sell products directly from each other. Now, I can't guarantee that any of these things are going to happen, and I certainly can't guarantee a time frame where some of these things might happen. But I do believe that open banking is a necessary condition for any of these elements. And I believe, certainly at the top end of the list, that there is going to be a huge amount of potential for all of us, including many of the people in this room. So if I get away now from the vision bit and just bring it a little bit closer, make it a little bit more tangible, bring it closer to the UK, what are we actually doing in the UK? What are we practically doing? So what we have created is something called the Open Banking Implementation Entity. And this is a central piece of infrastructure. It's about 120 odd people that are developing all of the open banking standards required. This entity was set up by the Competition and Markets Authority, so CMA on this slide, and was set up in September of 2016. The reason for it is that the CMA, Competition and Markets Authority, had undertaken a 2-year investigation into the effectiveness of competition within the current account industry in the UK. And at the end of that, they came up with a set of remedies. And one of those remedies was to create open banking. So that's the genesis of what we've created here. And interestingly, that open banking that the CMA required to do, fundamental to that was that there is an alignment to PSD2 built into the governance of that entity, right? So they want to see a convergence between open banking and PSD2. So, second block here. What is it that that's fundamentally different in the approach? Well, fundamentally different in the approach is that from the outset, the CMA wanted to create one API, one standard that all of the largest banks would use. So if you're a fintech in the UK and you want to access open banking, you don't need to connect to all the different protocols of all the different banks. We've got one standard that they're all going to use. Now, when I say all, that's not quite right. It's actually the 9 largest banks, or the 9 banks covered in the CMA order, but we believe that that covers approximately 80 to 90% of the UK current account market. Right, so the third point here, it is a private body. It is fundamentally governed by the CMA, but actually it's completely open source. So all of the standards that are being developed are available for anyone to use. And actually what we hope and expect is that once what we call the CMA 9, the 9 largest banks, actually deploy these standards in the marketplace and fintechs start building against it, that we will actually get a snowball effect where other banks, other participants will want to use those same APIs to meet their PSD2 requirements, but fundamentally to be able to access all the different products that the fintechs themselves are offering. So there is no inherent IP, there is no license associated with anything that happens within open banking. It's an open standard that's free to use for all. And the final point, because this is always very important when you create these kind of entities, is how does it get funded? Well, it does actually get funded by the CMA 9 themselves. And that is integral to the way that the Competition and Markets Authority work, and it's integral to the way that the order is constructed. So the CMA9 will fund that entity for the creation and also the evolution of those standards. So if that's what we're actually doing in the UK, I'd like to just take a moment to drill a little bit deeper into the importance of safety and security, because here in the UK, the implementation entity has got a very important role to play in that, and we're doing things a little bit different from the way that it's working in Europe as it currently stands. But let me build this up, particularly for people who are not party to what's going on in Europe. So, central to what we're doing is that we're putting consumers really at the heart of open banking. So in order for any activity to be undertaken on a consumer's account, it has to be done with their express and explicit consent. So consent is really at the heart of everything we do. And that's a notion that is enshrined within GDPR, and a very sensible notion at that. Once the consumer has expressed consent to allow something to happen in their account, to share data or to initiate a payment, the consumer will be able to see all of that consent on a permission dashboard. So they will be able to either go to the FinTech or to the bank themselves and see all the different FinTechs that they have given access to and what that level of access is. And crucially, if they want to turn off that access, they'll be able to do it. I tend to think a little bit about it a little bit like on my iPhone, where I've got location services, and I can see all the apps that I've granted it to, and I can control it in one single space. So it really puts the consumer at the center of this and gives them the control. The very APIs themselves, these are built and created around standard, tried and tested, highly secure approaches, and we use OAuth for the API in the UK, so we're very confident around that. The other thing that we're very confident about is the concept that the consumer will never have to share their username and password with a third party. So some people say that there is a form of open banking that exists at the moment. It's effectively, sometimes it's known as screen scraping, sometimes it's known as the live market. And in that version of open banking, the consumer gives their username and password to a third party, which will then use that to present it to the bank in order to access the information and access the payments. We're doing something fundamentally different here under the open banking standards, which is that the consumer will never have to do that. We use a redirection model. So when the FinTech and the consumer have agreed that they'd like something to happen, the consumer is redirected to the bank through a pop-up window. They will input their username and password there, and then they'll get redirected straight back to the FinTech. So the FinTech never holds on, or the third party never holds on to a consumer's username and password. We think that's critical for two reasons. One, is it's absolutely the safest thing for the consumer to do. But two, compared to the way the world works at the moment, we think conversion rates are going to get a lot higher. So consumers are going to be much more excited about using this than they are currently. You get a large amount of drop-offs if you say to a consumer, here's a fantastic proposition, now share your username and password with me. The final piece, the final element of security, which I'd just like to touch on, is that we have spent a lot of time ensuring that the third parties that present themselves to the banks are actually regulated, authorized third parties, right? So under PSD2, those of you that are somewhat familiar with it, any FinTech can approach a bank and say, I've got a customer here, and without any contracts being enforced, they can request that that information is shared. What we've done is something slightly differently, which is we've said that any FinTech that wants to play in the open banking space needs to be registered onto the open banking directory. If they're registered on the open banking directory, then the FinTech is given a digital certificate, and they use that digital certificate to present themselves to the bank. Now that's fundamentally important because it means that we can be confident that when a FinTech says that they are who they say they are and they present themselves to the bank, that is actually correct. So we're trying to ensure that we don't have man in the middle. We're trying to mitigate man in the middle type issues and phishing type issues by doing that. Crucially, any regulated entity in the UK that's regulated for open banking services will get access to the open banking directory. They just need to onboard themselves. There are no additional hurdles around that. So I hope I've conveyed to you the importance of safety and security in everything that we're doing. Let me just give you a little bit more of a sense around the timelines that we're working to, because I did whet your appetite up front by saying all this is imminent, and it really is imminent. Right, so the Open Banking Implementation Entity has been producing standards throughout the course of 2017. In March, we created our first set of standards, which were to do with product reference data. In July, and also in August, we actually, in July and August, we created, crucially, our set of standards for what we call read-write APIs. So that's read, being able to read transaction data through people's accounts. Write, that means able to write payments, so initiate payments through people's current accounts. So those standards are out there. They're subject to change control. Anyone can start viewing them, reviewing them, frankly, building against them. We are aiming for a 13th of January deadline, drop-dead date, and the reason for that is that's when PSD2 goes live across all of Europe. Right? In terms of getting ready for that, the FCA have opened themselves for authorization on 13th of October, which I think is Friday. Right? So any third party that wants to make use of open banking will need to get authorized. Authorized as either an account information services provider or a payment initiation service provider, or both. And the doors open for regulation at the end of this week. Right? And then on the 13th of January, we go live with the first release of open banking. So that's all very public at the moment. Now, the important thing about that is it is actually a first release. There will be subsequent releases of open banking throughout 2018 and frankly beyond. And that's crucial because on the 13th of January, what we will have is the ability for third parties with customers' consent to access and read their transaction data. But in terms of payments, it will be single immediate payments. In the second release and the third release, we're looking to expand that payment set to cover things such as future dated payments, recurring payments, international payments. We're also looking to expand it into other product sets, including credit cards and e-wallets. These are all items that are enshrined within PSD2, and we're bringing under the open banking framework. So stay tuned, and we hope to be releasing some further information on the roadmap in the next few weeks. So I think what I'd like to do is just actually draw this to a close now and really talk about my call to action, which is something I highlighted at the very beginning. We've got a fantastic opportunity here in the UK and across Europe because we've actually got funding to build one API standard that's going to cover all of open banking. That is largely built. It's going to be deployed. It's going to go live on the 13th of January. One of the most important things that government look at when they put all this together is whether or not it is a success. It's only going to be a success if people actually use it, consumers use it. Consumers only will use it if third parties are building product against it. So my call to action for you is a very straightforward one. Get involved, see what we're doing, see how it works for your business model. If there is a use case for your business model, and it can start with simply improving the onboarding experience all the way to creating new new products for customers. If it is of interest to you and it makes sense to get yourself regulated, then get yourself authorized as an AISP or a PISP or both. Once you've done that, you can start getting involved with testing. And if you're involved in the testing space, you will be co-developing products with ourselves as the open banking team. And then, on the 13th of January, you'll have access to 90% of the UK market. I don't know if we've got time for questions or not, but thank you very much for your time.